Texas doesn't prepare for cold the way Minnesota does. It doesn't need to. Most winters, a freeze means a few days of light frost, maybe some ice on the roads. Homes are built for heat, not insulation. Power lines are designed for summer peaks, not winter surges. The entire infrastructure assumes one thing: it won't get that cold. And for decades, it didn't. February in Texas usually means mild days, cool nights, maybe a jacket in the morning. Schools stay open. Construction continues. Life runs on the assumption that winter here is different, gentler, shorter, manageable. There are no salt trucks on standby, no emergency heating shelters, no grid designed to handle every house running a heater at full capacity for days, because it never needed to. Until February 2021, that assumption held. Then the jet stream buckled, and everything that worked in theory began to fail in practice.
The first signs came on Valentine's Day. Temperatures dropped faster than forecast models predicted. By February 15th, parts of Texas hit single digits Fahrenheit, temperatures not seen in decades. Snow fell across Houston. Ice coated Dallas. The cold didn't arrive gradually. It came in a wave, and it stayed. Weather stations recorded lows that broke century-old records. Alpine hit -7 degrees Fahrenheit. Amarillo dropped to -13. Even South Texas, where palm trees grow, saw freezing rain and sleet. This wasn't a cold snap. It was a polar vortex dislocation. Arctic air pushed south by a distorted jet stream, and it parked over the state. Meteorologists started using words like historic and unprecedented, but those words didn't mean much yet. By Monday morning, February 15th, the cold was no longer a weather story. It was becoming a systems problem, because everything in Texas, the grid, the pipes, the roads, the supply chains, was built assuming this wouldn't happen. And now it was happening.
When Texans woke up on February 15th, they did what anyone does when it's cold. They turned on the heat. Across the state, millions of thermostats clicked on at once. Electric heaters hummed, heat pumps labored, natural gas furnaces fired up. Demand on the power grid began to climb. By early morning, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, ERCOT, was watching electricity demand approach levels usually seen only in the peak of summer. Except this wasn't summer. This was a winter morning, and the grid wasn't ready. Texas runs its own grid, isolated from the rest of the country. That independence means flexibility, but it also means no backup. There's no easy way to pull power from neighboring states when things go wrong. And on the morning of February 15th, things were already going wrong. Demand was spiking, but supply was falling, because the cold wasn't just increasing how much power people needed, it was also destroying how much power the state could produce.
Power plants in Texas are designed for heat, not cold. Natural gas facilities, wind turbines, coal plants, even nuclear reactors, all of them started failing. Natural gas wells froze, pipelines lost pressure. Power plants that relied on gas couldn't get fuel. Wind turbines iced over and stopped spinning. Instrumentation froze, cooling water lines cracked. One by one, generation facilities went offline. By the early hours of February 15th, ERCOT had lost over 30 gigawatts of generation capacity, roughly a third of the state's power supply. The grid was built to handle planned outages, maintenance, even some unexpected failures. But not this, not everything failing at once. At 1:25 a.m., ERCOT made a decision. If the grid collapsed completely, it could take weeks to restart, so they ordered controlled outages. Rolling blackouts meant to last 15 to 45 minutes, spread across the state. But within hours, it became clear, these weren't rolling outages. The power wasn't coming back.
By Monday afternoon, millions of Texans were sitting in homes with no electricity. At first, it felt temporary. People bundled up, lit candles, waited. But as the hours passed and the power didn't return, the cold became the problem. Inside temperatures started to drop. Homes built for air conditioning, not insulation, lost heat fast. Within a few hours, indoor temperatures matched outdoor temperatures. Then they kept falling. Families huddled in one room. They piled on blankets. Some ran cars in garages for warmth, a dangerous choice that led to carbon monoxide poisoning. Others burned furniture, books, anything that would catch fire. Apartment buildings went dark and silent. Elevators stopped, hallways filled with cold air. People couldn't charge phones, couldn't check updates, couldn't call for help, and the cold kept pressing in. By the second night, homes in Texas were colder inside than outside. Power was gone, and it wasn't coming back soon. When the power failed, the water systems followed. Water treatment plants lost electricity, pumps stopped, pressure dropped, and then the pipes began to freeze. Texas homes aren't built with pipes in interior walls. They're often in attics and crawl spaces, exposed to outside temperatures. When those pipes froze, they cracked. When they thawed, they burst. Water poured into homes, through ceilings, down walls, into living rooms. By Tuesday, February 16th, over 14 million Texans were under boil water notices. Except most couldn't boil water. They had no power, no stove, no heat. People collected snow and melted it. They filled bathtubs before the water stopped entirely. They stood in line at grocery stores waiting for bottled water that never arrived. Hospitals lost water pressure. Dialysis centers couldn't operate. Nursing homes struggled to flush toilets. The cascade had moved from electricity to heat to water, and each failure made the next one worse. People adapted the way people do, quietly, without instructions, using whatever they had. Families moved into single rooms and sealed the doors with towels. Neighbors shared generators, food, propane tanks. Some drove to warming centers when they could find gas. Others stayed put, afraid to leave pets, afraid pipes would burst, afraid they'd return to nothing. In Dallas, people slept in their cars with the engine running. In Austin, families checked into hotel lobbies when rooms were full, just to sit somewhere warm. In Houston, lines formed at grocery stores before dawn, not for food, but for water. People posted updates on social media when they had signal, sharing where power was on, where water was available, which roads were passable. There was no coordinated response, no central communication, just people helping people, filling the gaps the system couldn't, and the cold didn't stop. Day 3, day 4, still no power, still no water, still no clear timeline for when things would return to normal. ERCOT kept saying the outages were temporary, but the power didn't come back. Generation capacity was still down, fuel supplies were still frozen, the grid was running on emergency reserves, barely holding together. Some neighborhoods had power, others didn't. There was no pattern anyone could see. Houses on the same street had different outcomes, one side dark, one side lit. Rolling outages were supposed to spread the burden, but in practice, some areas lost power for 15 minutes, others lost it for 4 days. Hospitals stayed online. Some grocery stores had backup power, but most of the state was still cold, still dark, still waiting. By Wednesday, the death toll was rising. Hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning, house fires from makeshift heating, car accidents on iced roads. The cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was lethal. And the system built to protect people from it wasn't working, because the system assumed this wouldn't happen, and no one knew when it would end. Slowly, power began to return. Not everywhere, not evenly, but plant by plant, the grid started to recover. Temperatures began to rise. The extreme cold loosened its grip. By Thursday, February 18th, some homes had electricity again. By Friday, water pressure started returning in parts of the state, but the damage was done. Pipes had burst in millions of homes, ceilings sagged with water, walls were ruined. People returned to houses that were uninhabitable. Insurance claims flooded in. Contractors were booked for months, and even as the lights came back on, the water didn't. Boil water notices remained in effect for days, then weeks in some areas. Treatment plants were still damaged. Distribution systems were still compromised. The freeze lasted less than a week, but the recovery took months, and for many, normal never fully returned. Because the freeze didn't just break pipes, it broke assumptions. Texas after the freeze looked the same. Same roads, same buildings, same grid,
But something had shifted. People who had lived through it remembered what it felt like when the power went out and didn't come back, when the water stopped and no one knew when it would return, when the system they relied on every day just stopped. Investigations followed, reports were written, changes were recommended, weatherization requirements, fuel reserves, grid improvements. But the lesson wasn't technical, it was structural. Texas had built a system optimized for one condition, heat, and assumed the opposite would never happen. And when it did, every dependency revealed itself at once. Power, water, heat, food, communication. Each one relied on the next, and when the first one failed, the rest followed. The freeze killed over 200 people. It caused billions in damage, but it also showed something simple and uncomfortable. Infrastructure isn't just about capacity, it's about assumptions, and when the assumptions are wrong, everything built on them fails together.